Great. Well, welcome, everyone. We're really happy to have you all here, and we're really excited to have Shaughnessy Naughton here. This is the first of a series that we're hosting on science and public advocacy this fall, and the talks are co-sponsored by the Miller-Worley Center for the Environment, the Weizmann Center for Leadership, and the Science Center, as well as the Department of Environmental Studies. And funding for the series is established by the Miller-Worley Fund, the Nordhoff Environmental Literacy Fund, and the Science Center Directorship Fund. I want to take an opportunity to extend a special thanks to Janet Lansbury, Lynn Latorno, and Ellen Duffy, who have done a lot of work to pull this event and related ones together, and our partners in event planning, advancement, communications, who have also helped out. Our second talk in this event will be 2 weeks from today, Thursday, October 5th at 4:30 in this same room. Robert Musil, President and CEO of the Rachel Carson Council, will be speaking on the legacy of Rachel Carson, empathy and environmental justice, and we hope you can join us then too. But today, we are just thrilled to have Shaughnessy Naughton here. She has a fascinating and impressive background, and it has been a privilege to spend the last day with her, with someone of such caliber and vision. A graduate of Bryn Mawr College, she is an example of the power of women's colleges to cultivate strong leaders. With a degree in chemistry and research experience working on the synthesis of a drug to treat breast cancer, she joined the team at Wyeth Laboratories as a key member of the infectious disease research group after graduating in 1999. In 2003, she took over her family's small publishing business, and she ran that for 10 years, until in 2014, concerned about the future of science in the United States, she ran for Congress in Pennsylvania's 8th District. While ultimately she was not successful, she saw the effects of not enough people with scientific backgrounds in Congress, and the mocking of basic research and the denial of climate change. As a result, Shaughnessy founded 314 Action to encourage the scientific community to get involved in the political process. The organization is committed to electing more leaders who will use their training as STEM professionals to influence policymaking. She brings to this vision not only a background that bridges public, private, and nonprofit worlds, but also a commitment to putting in the pieces from the local to global scale that bring this vision into action. And her story illustrates how one person, through hard work, persistence, patience, and creativity, can change the world. So with that introduction, please welcome Shaughnessy Naughton.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you all for coming tonight. I have spent all day on the Mount Holyoke campus, and it is a beautiful place to spend the day. I appreciate you having me. I also want to thank Janet for your hospitality, and John Western and Sonia Stevens for dinner this evening. So my name is Shaughnessy Naughton. I am the founder of 314 Action. And 314 may sound familiar to many of you. It's the first 3 digits of pi. I began this adventure by running for Congress myself. My background is I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family and was the first in my generation to go to college. And I went to Bryn Mawr College, fellow Seven Sisters, and majored in chemistry, worked in breast cancer research and drug discovery, and had planned on continuing that pursuit until my brother Donald reached out and asked me to come help with our family business that was in trouble. Now, I had gone to college to not go in the family business, so this was a little bit of a shock, but I stepped in and helped turn things around and ran the business for over a decade. And in 2013, I was really frustrated with the attacks on science and the lack of anything getting done in Congress, and decided to run for Congress in Pennsylvania's 8th District, where I'm from, just outside of Philadelphia. So I was about 35 at the time, which I discovered is the exact wrong age to try to ask your friends for money to support your campaign for Congress. You know, as college students, you may think you're poor, but just wait until you have children. it's more. And so one of the things that happens when you run for, especially an office like Congress, is the first thing people ask you is, well, how much money do you think you can raise? I'd never raised money before. I'd been in business, but it's a very different thing to ask someone to invest in you as a candidate, and discover that's pretty hard. And so, that first $100,000 that I had to raise, we, fought, made it. And then you find out you have to go back to those same people to raise the next $100,000. And that's really hard. And then when you have to go back the third time, that's when your friends stop talking to you. But part of what went into that for me was because the Democratic committee had already endorsed a candidate a Democratic candidate in this race, I was locked out of a lot of traditional Democratic donors. And so we had to think creatively, and a big part of why I was running was because I was concerned about the attacks on science and the lack of steady funding for research. And so we started reaching out to chemists across the country, actually really using the scientific method of calling chemists and seeing if that worked, and then expanding from there. And so we reached out to scientists across the country and told them about myself and why I was running and whether they could vote for me or not, asking for their support because of what I stood for. And ultimately, I was not successful in the race, but we did raise a considerable sum and ran a credible campaign. And I certainly learned a lot. I had heard about trackers prior to that, but didn't experience it myself until I got a camera shoved in my face and people trying to provoke you. As a woman running, you get a lot of unsolicited advice. I had 65-year-old men telling me how I should dress and how I should wear my hair, and letting me know I should make myself more frumpy so that I would be more appealing and stop wearing skirts. So what I observed was that there are a whole lot of businessmen and attorneys in Congress, but not many people with scientific backgrounds. And I think we see the results of that reflected in legislative priorities and lack of anything really getting done, the dysfunction in Congress. And so I founded 314 Action to continue to build on the work that we did in my congressional race, to speak to the scientific community about the importance of scientists going beyond just advocacy and actually getting involved in electoral politics. And that meant going beyond just signing polite letters and waiting to be tapped for your expertise and stepping up and getting involved. And one of the things that we want to see is more people with scientific backgrounds run for office and to help them to do that. I think one of the conclusions that we can make from the 2016 elections is that people voted for change. And I think that scientists represent change in a more productive way as political outsiders. So another part of what we are doing at 314 Action is we believe it's important to make science more visible in local communities and to make scientists more visible, because we think we'll see greater electoral success when scientists take a more active role in their communities. Often there's this caricature of mad scientists in a lab that is just conducting research for research's sake. And as many of you know, as scientists, that is not the case. There is a real motivation to better humanity through science, whether that's through health or technological advances. And I think that's an important story that we need to tell, not just in big cities, but all across America. So we have been working throughout the whole country to organize folks that care about pursuing a more pro-science agenda, to have more people engage their elected officials, to hold them accountable when they are basing policy or laws on anything other than sound science, and to communicate the urgency and the need for that across the country. So earlier this year, we started an initiative of Out of the Lab into Public Office. And we announced that we would be holding a candidate training for scientists to give them a peek behind the curtain of what is actually involved in putting together a campaign and running for public office. We announced that in January, and I optimistically predicted that we would have 1,000 scientists join us for our Pi Day candidate training on March 14th. And to date, we've had close to 7,000 scientists across the country reach out to ask for help on their campaigns, from school board and local races through the state legislature and through the federal level. And I find that very encouraging. With all the upsetting and discouraging news that we have seen out of the Trump administration, I think one good thing is we have seen people realizing that it's no longer just someone else's job to step up and act, and that we all need to take a role in our democracy. So why scientists? Well, I think there are two main reasons that scientists are really needed in elected office, and not just as advisory positions. The basis of a healthy, robust economy are three things: education, research and development, and a healthy infrastructure to bring it to market. And I believe scientists understand that better due to the nature of their careers than almost anyone, and will advocate for that on a more convincing basis than most. Second, scientists are problem solvers. And right now, when you look at the gridlock and dysfunction in Congress, but really at all levels of government, having problem solvers is what we desperately need. And finally, when you're looking at the problems facing our country right now, whether it's nuclear weapons or cybersecurity, climate change, or protecting the integrity of our elections, we need the input and expertise of STEM professionals, not just in an advisory position, but having a seat at the table. So far this year, we have over 6,000 candidates running, some in 2017. We do have elections in 2017, but many for 2018 and beyond. We have now over 100 campus chapters on universities and colleges across the country. And we have state coordinators and local coordinators, I think in about 40 states and all over the continental US. Our network is now close to 250,000 people, which I think is quite promising as far as where we want to go with this organization. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about some of the candidates that we have been working with so far this year. We have in Pennsylvania's 6th District, which is near my home, near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, we have an Air Force veteran, engineer, woman named Chrissy Houlihan running for Congress against an incumbent Republican. And she's really made reason and pragmatism centerfold of her campaign, and I think that's quite encouraging. We have candidates in California with very interesting backgrounds, bridging both research and academia as well as entrepreneurship. And a physician in California that came here as a refugee, which I think in this time when we have an administration really demonizing too many marginalized people can be a very strong story to tell. So why are we doing this? Well, we think it's really important that we are all engaged in our democracy. And not everyone is going to want to run for Congress or any office, but there is a lot you can do at your local level that doesn't require putting your life on hold or your career on pause. And there are positions like school board and local offices that are incredibly important. I mean, if you think about what school boards determine, they determine the curriculum that children are going to be taught. And I think too often, especially in this environment where we have the Trump show every day, it can be easy to overlook what's happening locally. And I really want to emphasize to everyone in this room, whether you have children in public schools yet or not, to try to pay attention to what's going on, because a lot of mischief can be done at the local level. But there are other ways to get involved. You can volunteer on campaigns. One of the things that I ask of all our supporters is to make sure you're communicating with your elected officials. You know, even the most anti-science legislator can count. And they count the phone calls that come into their offices and the emails that come into their offices, whether for or against an issue. And it's incredibly important that we all make our voices heard. One of the initiatives that we are currently working on is our STEM Integrity Pledge. And this is a very simple pledge that we are asking folks to sign on to and ask their elected officials to sign on to, that they will base policy on sound science and ask, cabinet officials that they have to listen to the scientists that have been paid by taxpayers to advise them. So that's incredibly important, as well as to vote. And to remember that we have elections every 6 months in this country, and not just every 4 years. And to be voting in each and every one of those elections, even if you may not fully appreciate the importance of it at this time. So how many of you marched in the Women's March? Good. How about the March for Science? Good. Now, how many of you have been phone banking or knocking on doors for a candidate this fall? That's what we need to work on. We need to take that energy that the March all inspired in us and put it to productive use and help deserving candidates, whether they have a scientific background or not, but help deserving candidates get elected so that we can have a pro-science, fact-based agenda in government. And for many of you students, there are career paths in the political world that you should consider. Whether it is, working on a campaign can be a very exciting and roller coaster experience, but one worth having, as well as just offering your expertise and advice as scientists to elected officials. And you'll be surprised how appreciative they are for your help. So what we're asking from you is, think about starting a campus chapter. There are students organizing across the country for 314 Action, or hold a salon with your colleagues. I think that we need to all take very seriously our role in putting our democracy back on track. So please join the conversation. We have our STEM Principles Pledge, our Scientific Integrity Pledge on our website. It is affiliated with legislation that has been proposed in the House and Senate, and encourage your lawmakers to do the same. And join us on social media, on our website. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have tonight.
Hi, thank you for being here. You mentioned that I'm a first-year student, so I'm brand new, my first 2 weeks. So I'm currently researching, asking people what their different career routes were and how they got to where they were. And you said that as students, there's different career paths that would join the forces and advocate for the same values that 314 Action is advocating for. So could you expand more on the different career paths or career options that not necessarily are like scientifically studies, but that would help with these actions and values that we want to see in our government?
Even as students, you can start volunteering on campaigns, and that's everything from helping knock on doors and get out the vote to campaigns need to raise money to communicate their message. So those are some of the paths. There's a lot of polling that goes into campaigns, which I think people from the sciences are well synced to take that path. As well as, I think when we have people from different perspectives involved in putting together a campaign, you get a different result, and you get a different emphasis and different priorities. So I think working with campaigns on that could be a very rewarding experience for you.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm a senior at Mount Holyoke. I'll remain standing. So a part of science is that it's very objective and it's factual. And I'm wondering, when scientists come to you to ask for help regarding some sort of public service campaign, do they fear that people may say there's like switching the facts or kind of fudging the information? And how do you address those kinds of fears, whether they're valid or invalid?
Well, I think there traditionally has been a concern from the scientific community of politicizing science. I would argue that the politicization of science isn't coming from the scientific community, it's coming from politicians. And the way we push back against that is to claim a seat at the table. There is a reality, there is a difference in the way scientists communicate with themselves versus how they need to communicate with the public. And it's not a question of honesty or bending the facts, because I don't think that is anyone's intention. But it's about communicating with people in a way that they can understand what you're actually trying to say. And one of the beauties of science is that there is uncertainty, and that is different than I guess with scientists, they're comfortable in not speaking in absolutes, whereas politicians are very comfortable in speaking in absolutes. So scientists do have to understand how communicating with the public, just because they haven't said everything doesn't mean they can't say anything and still get their point across. And that is a challenge, but I think it's one that is important to overcome.
Hi, I'm Julie. I'm a recent alum. Thank you for your talk. I'm curious what you have to say about early career scientists and the particular opportunities and challenges they face, and what sorts of resources they may need to get involved in the political process.
But there are ways to get involved, whether it's helping on other people's campaigns or running for a local race, that doesn't require you to put aside your career. It can be very hard, especially in this environment where it has motivated so many people to get involved, to think that you have to make that decision of whether pursuing your scientific career or getting involved. It's not the case. You can do both. And I think it's, I think it's important that you do. Running for office isn't for everyone. It can be a pretty scary thing, as a matter of fact. But you can help in other ways, whether it's volunteering your time, your expertise, even just spending an afternoon stuffing envelopes. It all matters.
Hi, I'm Hannah, and I'm a first year. I think you mentioned that you ran as a Democrat for the race.
Mhm.
Do you have a lot of Republican support or support from other parties, or is it mainly just Democrats?
Mostly, it has been Democrats that have reached out to us. Our advocacy and our trainings are open to candidates of all parties, or no parties. But for the most part, at least on the federal level, we've been working with Democratic candidates. For the local races, a lot of those are nonpartisan, so there's a mix there.
I noticed that one of the strategies you started with is recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested to hear how it is that you recruit scientists and what they tell you some of the stumbling blocks are, the things the reasons they might not have run or the reasons they might consider not running. And then I also wanted to hear your thoughts on scientists in office versus improving science advocates in office. Is there part of your organization that thinks not only about bringing people with a scientific background in, but improving knowledge of what science is and how we can advocate for it, even if the particular individual in office isn't a scientist themselves?
Sure. I'll start with your first question about recruitment. So, as I mentioned, we have a network of supporters across the country, and we have state and local coordinators across the country. And part of what they do, in addition to engaging with their local communities and making science more visible there, is they keep an eye out for people that we should be talking to about running, or maybe are thinking about running but just don't know where to start. Because I think that is a hindrance for a lot of people. And a big concern for a lot of them is what happens to my career, especially as academics. You know, that the law profession, which a lot of politicians come from, is very hospitable to attorneys cycling in and out of their law careers, working in the administration for a few years and coming back, or running for office and coming back. And it's also very hospitable to their colleagues supporting them financially in those endeavors. And we don't see the same culture in science or academia. And so I think, though, there's a case to be made that as more academics do take on these type of roles, universities will see the benefit of having people, their colleagues, having had a seat at the table in government, but we're not quite there yet. So a lot of people are, concerned about where they are in their career, and so sometimes the conclusion is, we'll run for a more local office to start getting involved and building a base, and that's really important because we will see greater success if we build that pipeline to the federal level. Another concern, obviously, is, what is this going to cost me? What's this going to do to my family? And those are very personal measures that people need to take into consideration and have to decide for themselves. As far as advocacy, I mean, our focus is on making science more visible and holding politicians accountable. And I think there are a number of organizations that work on advising politicians on science policy. And we certainly encourage our members to take an active role in doing that because it's needed. And generally, politicians are pretty grateful for it.
I know you've already kind of talked briefly about maintaining your momentum for running for office, even with the setbacks as a woman. Would you mind elaborating a little more on how specifically you just maintained that enthusiasm?
Part of what I did and do in my life is, I set a goal and don't let things that get in the way distract me from that. And it can be tough when you're dealing with political attacks or personal attacks. But it's really a lesson that you can take throughout your life. There's always going to be bumps along the way. There's always going to be things that can potentially throw you off. But when you maintain the vision of where you're going, those, although they affect you, they don't take you off your path. And as students, it's a challenge you're going to face. Even at a wonderful place like Mount Holyoke, you're still going to run into problems along your way towards graduation and your career goals. But the important thing is to stay focused and to not internalize flaws or mistakes or problems as being, an indictment on yourself. It's really, it's being a human. And so you just have to get past it and keep going.
So 314 action is such a great idea. I'm curious about the genesis of it, and actually even going back a little further than that. So I'm wondering, what pulled you into the political arena? Was what inspired you to go in and run? And then were there specific moments or stories during the campaign that made you think, wow, we really need something like, 314 action, what a great idea. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit of the story behind it.
Sure. Well, I was really spurred to action by the attacks on science and that it was putting us behind on an international stage as well as hurting us economically. When President Kennedy said that we were going to go to the moon, NASA didn't even know if we were going to be able to do it, but we got there, we inspired a generation of people to go into the sciences, and we created new industries and technologies and hundreds of thousands of jobs. And I think we are at a moment where we could be doing that again with an investment in clean technology, and that was something that really motivated me to run. By investing in a low carbon future, we could really recreate the enthusiasm and economic boom that the race to space got us, or the race to the moon. As far as 314 action, I was lucky. I had friends and volunteers that helped me put together my campaign, but a lot of it was a little bit feeling around in the dark and seeing what worked and what didn't. And so what I wanted to do with 314 action was, to encourage scientists and STEM professionals to make that jump, but in knowing that in order for that to happen, they're going to need some more information and giving them a pathway to do it, whether it's connecting them with staff or consultants or just laying out what the process is. And we're seeing that, this has spurred people to jump in and run for office, and they're worthy candidates to support. So I think it, I was not expecting the response that we've gotten. I'm overwhelmed actually by the response we've gotten, but I think that's a good thing in this environment that so many people are stepping up to get involved.
I'm a senior here. And all of the things that you had mentioned, like running for local office and voting and getting involved in campaigns and whatnot, is really focused in the U.S. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the role of science on global policy and international politics.
A few years ago when the nuclear deal with Iran was being discussed, I think that was another time when we saw a lot of the scientific community really stepping up to get involved because there is so much, and I think politicians are sometimes very good at manipulating people's fears and misunderstanding of, for example, what goes into a nuclear program. And if you listen to some politicians, you would think that it was as simple as putting a spot of pot of spaghetti on the stove and taking it off when inspectors come in. And so I think there's a greater need for scientists to not just wait until they are really big international problems for them to step up and have their voices heard. And that was one example. Right now, we are, facing another crisis with North Korea, and having scientists with a voice of reason, I think, would be a good thing to have at the table in deciding where we go with that. We have actually gotten a fair amount of outreach from politicians and scientists around the world who either have scientific backgrounds and are in public office. We just haven't had the ability to expand beyond what we're already doing. But there are international examples. I mean, Angela Merkel is a chemist. Margaret Thatcher was a chemist. So there are examples out there.
I have a question I've been wanting to ask, actually. You mentioned in a couple of our conversations the opportunities that you had at Bryn Mawr. And I'm curious how you feel your liberal arts education prepared you to do what you're doing now.
Well, as much as I love science, and I do love the experience I had at a liberal arts college where you weren't just put into one silo, and you got to really have a well-rounded education and, take advantage of that. I know some of you are freshmen, some of you are further along in the process, but there's no other time in your life where you will have the freedom that you do now to study things that maybe you don't want to spend a career on, but will open your eyes to new experiences and new ideas, and really expand your excitement for life, which I think is unique to liberal arts education.
Hi. I was just curious, what is your opinion or what are your feelings on politicians that have some sort of scientific background, like, for example, Ben Carson, who then don't advocate for science?
Yes. Well, it's not fair to just pick on Ben Carson. We've got the Health and Human Services Secretary, and Rand Paul. I think it's really unfortunate because they should know better. So it shows that nothing's perfect, but I think overall, when you look at scientists, they are more rooted in fact and reason, but there's always exceptions. And the one good thing I'll say about Rand Paul is he is against this repeal of the current healthcare bill, so we can thank him for that. But there's no perfect example. There's always exceptions.
Okay, well, I think what we might do is give those of you who have pressing questions but aren't quite sure you want to raise your hand yet a chance to come down and talk to Shaughnessy one-on-one if you would like for the remainder of the time that we have. But let's take a minute just to thank everyone for coming. Thank everyone for coming, sorry. Thank Shaughnessy for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming too.